Colonel Irwin, in a 1986 conversation with Ron, tells about the results of those scans.
We decided that since there was some metal in those analyses that we got back from Galbraith, that it might be worthwhile to look at the boat with a metal detector. And so, remember you expressed a desire to be there when we checked this out, and you were there.
Yeah, we got some real positive readings, didn't we?
Yeah.
As we went up and down the long direction of the formation. And then,
at that moment in time, we were getting metal readings,
right.
But other than that they appeared at fairly uniform intervals.
Right. The spacing made it appear like, very much like it was a man-made object.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
When they returned to the hotel and word spread, several other ark hunters wanted to see the site. One group was headed by Marv Steffens, and when the metal detector scans were repeated, his group immediately got very excited. Ron and Orhan later spent an entire day examining the area above the boat-shaped object and visiting local villages, asking if anyone knew any stories about an ancient ship being in the region. They discovered that no one knew anything about a ship being located in the vicinity. They did learn that the village where Ron had found the anchor stones was known as the Place of the Eight, although the villagers admitted that they had no idea where the name came from. They also learned that the mountain the boat-shaped object was on was locally called a term which loosely translated to Doomsday Mountain, although again no one knew where these names came from. There is good reason why there is no record of any local traditions about the ark or a ship in the area. The original inhabitants of this region were attacked and displaced by the present inhabitants in the early years of this century. The invaders took over the lands, their homes, and even their flocks and herds, but all knowledge of any local traditions the original inhabitants may have had was lost. When Ron and Orhan scoured the countryside above the boat-shaped object, they discovered something which Ron believed was extremely important. They found a very strange section of earth approximately 120 feet long and 40 feet wide, which appeared to be outlined by a thick rim of petrified wood. Scattered over and around this section were strange-looking objects which looked like rocks, but which were very heavy and felt like metal. Ron took specimens of this strange substance. He had also taken similar specimens from the lower broken section of the site, and his theory was that it was ballast from the hull of the ark. He had earlier concluded that the ship had slid to its present location in a lava or mud flow, and he now believed that this was a portion of the hull that had remained embedded in the earth. When the ark was carried down the mountainside, it was ripped away from this portion of the hull, causing the ballast material to be left lying scattered all around. In this same area, they also found a recently constructed stone structure which had pieces of an ancient broken stele incorporated in it. Being careful not to draw the attention of the locals to these broken pieces of stone, they photographed the pictures inscribed on these stones. Pieced together, these broken pieces depicted a boat-shaped object very similar to the 1950s aerial photograph. And within this boat shape were 8 faces. The very unique mountain ridge above the boat-shaped object was also depicted, with ravens in flight, and next to the ridge was depicted a volcanic-looking mountain, a mountain that had since subsided. When Ron stood on the top of the ridge and looked south where this mountain was represented as being, he saw that there was a mountain in that location, but that it was no longer visible from the viewpoint of the artist of the stele. This was, Ron was sure, the volcano that had erupted many, many years ago and covered the boat with lava. since the broken pieces of the stele were found near the location of the section he believed was the bottom of the hull embedded in the earth. He believed this stele had once marked the original location of the ark. Orhan had also arranged permission for Ron to take more substantial specimens from the boat-shaped object as well as from the surrounding terrain. On August 25, 1984, Ron left Turkey with his specimens and headed towards Athens to connect with his overseas flight. When he arrived in Athens and purchased a newspaper, he read that Marv Steffens had called a news conference in Ankara about the time Ron had left, and producing a bag of his own specimens, he announced that Noah's Ark had been found. He was immediately detained, accused of taking valuable artifacts, and with this, he proceeded to tell the authorities that Ron too had left taking specimens and was already out of the country. It had only been a little over 4 months since Ron and his 2 sons had been released from a 3-month prison term in Saudi Arabia after being falsely accused of being Israeli spies, and he wasn't very happy at this turn of events. If the Turks believed he had taken valuable artifacts from their country, his days of working on Noah's Ark were finished. When he arrived in New York, he checked into the Carlton Hotel near the airport and called the Turkish United Nations mission, explaining what had happened. Within a few hours, 3 Turkish representatives arrived at his hotel, examined his specimens, and told him that he was free to keep them. They had checked with authorities in Ankara and discovered that he really did have permission to take the specimens. He was exonerated of the charges, but only after the whole event had made the newspapers and Ted Koppel had called him a thief on Nightline. However, what looked like a disaster turned out to be the event that first caused the Turks to take an official interest in the site. The United Nations Observer and International Report featured a full-page story on Ron and the evidence at the site.
What Wyatt found measures almost identically to the text offered in the 6th chapter of Genesis in the Old Testament. It was also found in the area where the Bible says the ark finally came to rest.
What we actually have found is physical evidence that this is a boat. Whether or not it's Noah's Ark is up to the people that review the material. That's up to them to decide on that. My personal feeling is that it is Noah's Ark.
Wyatt admits his skeptics are severe, and he has a long road to travel before his theories can be totally tested. The rock, wood, and metal samples are currently being analyzed, with reports due on the specimens by mid-September. If it is the ark, what has been proven?
To the people that believe in God, this will be a confirmation of their faith.
Wyatt firmly believes ultimately his find will be proven to be that of Noah's Ark. Even then, he says, there'll be some who still won't believe it. As far as the timing of this find, he has an explanation.
But I think everything is on a time schedule, and I believe that when the time is right, these things will be brought out.
Back at home, Ron sent one specimen that he had taken from the section he believed was the embedded hull above the ark to Colonel Irwin, who then sent it to Los Alamos National Labs for careful analysis. Ron then went to Galbraith Labs with his new batch of specimens. These analyses were even more encouraging than the 1979 ones, as these revealed extremely high metal contents, not only of iron, but also of aluminum. Although aluminum constitutes about 8% of the Earth's crust in weight, it never occurs in the metallic form in nature. It occurs as alumina. Yet, these analyses revealed that the specimens contained both alumina and aluminum. Ron believed that the petrified structures would not only have been petrified with minerals from the soil above the site, but also with the molecules of the metal fittings of the ship, which contained aluminum as well as iron. Ron arranged to return to the site a few months later in October of 1984. The Turkish government had sent several of their own scientists to examine the object, and Ron arranged to loan them one of the White's metal detectors. He wanted to see if they could duplicate the pattern of metal readings at even intervals. They did. Colonel Irwin was dedicated to searching for the Ark on Mount Ararat, but he continued to offer Ron any assistance he could. When he received a call from a man who was interested in searching for the Ark, but who expressed the belief that it couldn't possibly have landed on Mount Ararat, he referred this man to Ron. Early in 1985, Dave Fassel called Ron. Dave was in the marine salvage business and was familiar with several new technologies which were used in non-destructive investigations, such as radar. When Ron told him about the boat-shaped object, which he now without reservation referred to as the Ark, Dave was very interested. Ron sent him photographs and filled him in on all the data from his research, especially about the 13 lines of metal readings which extended from one end of the ship to the other. On March 20th, 1985, Ron and Dave arrived in Turkey. Meeting them there was Samaran al-Muteri of Saudi Arabia, who had recently visited Ron in the United States. Samaran wanted Ron to show him the mountain in Saudi Arabia that Ron believed was Mount Sinai. In December of 1983, Ron and his sons entered Saudi without a visa and went to Jebel el-Lawz, but were then arrested at the Jordanian border after being reported as spies. The event had caused quite a stir in Saudi, and Samaran had learned of Ron's claim after his release. Now he wanted Ron to come back to Saudi with him to show him the site, but perhaps to ensure that Ron's claims were valid, he wanted to see Noah's Ark first. When Ron and Dave arrived, Samaran was ill, and they had to delay their departure to eastern Turkey until he felt better. During this time, Mine Unler arranged for them to meet with Dr. Ekrem Arkugal, Turkey's leading archaeologist, world-renowned for his excavations of the Hittite Empire in Turkey. Familiar with both Ron's research and the reports of the Turkish scientists from the fall of 1984, Dr. Arkugal made the following statement.
May I congratulate you for that great success, really.
Thank you, sir.
I believe it is an ancient remains of an old ship.
This, since the earthquake pushed it up, the wood, you see, is eroding out, and it must be covered quickly also, because we're losing much.
It must be preserved. It must be preserved. These are the remains, which are at any rate remains of a ship.
Yes.
Things had changed a great deal in the past 8 months. Ron now had liaisons who made his arrangements with the proper officials and acted as translators. The government had officially taken an interest in the site, and now their leading archaeologists stated unequivocally that the object was a ship. The three men then went to the site, and immediately Dave Fassel, who certainly knew about ships, was overwhelmed by what he saw. He had brought 2 different types of metal detectors, a pulse induction type and the new and controversial molecular frequency generator, which, unlike the conventional metal detectors, was supposed to be able to discriminate types of metals as well as receive readings from great distances. They again were able to detect the regular pattern of metal readings both along the surface and along the sides of the ship. Ron then took them to see the anchor stones in the village as well as the old stone house and the tombstones. But when they arrived at the house, they found it reduced to rubble and the tombstones gone. Where the tombstones had once rested was now a hole partially refilled. Ron was devastated. From that point on, he was very careful not to draw attention to anything of interest for fear of it being destroyed or removed. Samaran, by now very excited, then arranged for Ron as well as David to go to Saudi Arabia. But before they left, Mene Unler arranged a meeting for Ron with all of the Turkish ministries involved in about 2 weeks, and he would formally present the results of his research and his plans for future investigations. On April 9th, they returned to Turkey from Saudi, and Ron stayed and met with the officials who listened to his evidence, and they told him that they would work with him in any way that they could.